Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and with me for another collaborative episode. We've done this. This is a tradition now. After we do it 2 years in a row, it's a full tradition. Erik Fisher on Beyond the To-Do List. Thanks so much for joining me to dive into Volume 2 of Productivity A to Z.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
So for those that are listening to this episode and did not listen to Volume 1, we are live streaming this right now, by the way. So for those, we're doing this well in advance to make sure that it's all ready for the holiday season as we wrap up 2025 and go into 2026. Last year, we did a collaborative episode where we chose words for each letter of the alphabet that we felt embodied productivity, time management, and even our own evolution of what we think about when we're talking about those terms, right? So kind of thinking about I've been listening lately to the book, Murakami's book, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. Like, it's kind of like, I'm looking at that going, yeah, this is kind of things that we talk about when we talk about being productive or looking at your to-do list. And so what we did was we each chose a word for every letter of the alphabet. On this episode, you're going to hear from A to M, and then part 2, which will be on Beyond the To-Do List, you will hear the conclusion of the last letters of the alphabet. And again, since Erik is hosting part 2 this year, Z, because that's how he says.
I'll say Z. I don't care.
For those that have listened to and we will put Volume 1 for each of our episodes in the show notes, you'll be able to hear words that we chose. We did our best to not repeat those words, but Erik, you didn't really dive into Volume 1 again. Like, I didn't go back and listen to it too.
No.
I just kind of had, hey, here's what we chose as the primary words, but we might have some repeats, right?
We might, but I think for the most part, I was surprised by how little retread there was. So
yeah. So what has changed before we kind of go into the letters? What's changed between this year and last year for you, Erik? Now, not necessarily in the words, although maybe this will inform the words that you chose. But what's changed between this year and last year?
For me, I think the biggest thing after years of working remotely, I've worked for multiple companies and all of that, but after 11 straight years of working 100% remotely, other than going to a team on site or a conference or something, I'm pretty much daily back in an office here locally, and I love my team. And so even though today's my third remote day in 90 days that I've done, I have the ability to do it. But those first 2 and even a little bit today, I was just like, man, I kind of miss my work fam. So it definitely changes the way that I've been approaching things, because some of that in person, some of that constant movement and motion that's not 100% digital, but it's definitely working in digital and in Monday and all those good tools, Slack. But there's also this in-person, there's a person right next to me component. So,
well, it dovetails nicely into our first letter of the alphabet, which is A. And since you were the guest on this episode, why don't you start? I think it's a perfect kind of segue into the choice that you've made for the letter A.
So letter A for me was adaptability. And if anything, that's what I've had to really roll with. So yeah, I would say there's been so many times that plans are made and plans are changed. And so you've got to roll with it. There's, a flexibility to it. It's again, it's an immediate, okay, what was the plan? Okay, now what is the plan now? Or the goal has changed. We haven't changed the plan yet, but the goal has changed. So now we need to change the plan according to the goal. And so adaptability is the name of the game. Like some days I come in, I know what I'm planning on doing today. Tell me what I'm really going to be doing today.
Well, and the environmental aspect of it too. You've had to adapt to a different environment, where you're working, when you're working remotely on your own, when you're in your study or your office, it's you and there is a distance there that you don't necessarily have, which is good or bad in an office environment. So to me, there's that adaptability factor that I don't know that people take into account nearly as much in 2 ways. Number one, when they go back to, working in a more, in-person environment, but also conversely, and we're seeing this too, is a failure to adapt to the new reality and norms of hybrid working, where we're seeing such a push to get people back into the offices and so on and
Hmm.
so forth, as opposed to offering this hybrid option, which, let's face it, during the pandemic, it was something that was kind of thrust upon us. And I think that's part of the resistance as opposed to the natural progression because it was happening anyway.
Yeah. The weird thing for me, and this is something, I mean, within the first 2 weeks, I realized, wow, I have a lot more energy because there's people around. And it wasn't necessarily that because I'm an introvert, the people around me aren't necessarily giving me energy. In fact, I had to then figure out, oh, I'm low energy now and there's people around. So I need to I need to take a break. And I'm sure that's going to come up in later words today. Um, it's more that I realized that I just had to be aware of my situation. But overall, again, in that first 2 weeks, my energy level was suddenly much higher. I was getting up and I was taking breaks consciously. I was walking around and I was aware of who was or wasn't going to be there that day. Like, there have been a couple times where I was like, I'm the only one here on my team for like an hour or two, and it feels weird. And back home, that would have been peaceful. So I don't
Right.
know. Changes,
It
man, changes.
well and I think this dovetails nicely into the word I chose, which is alignment, right? And the
Hmm.
reason I chose that word, which by the way is not a word I typically use. Again, I don't like the term time management anymore because it assumes that we can manage something that, we have no agency over, right? We have agency over our schedule, over our calendar, but time moves on whether we want it to or not. Also, productivity, the term itself, I think has been broken for a while. And I think that there's ways that we can being productive is different than productivity in a lot of ways. Alignment is one of those words that people just they understand as opposed to like a term I prefer, which is attunement, right? Because I think there's more of a holistic or harmonizing element to it. But really, still what alignment is the idea of aligning what you intend to do with your attention, right? So how those things match up. And when you think about alignment in terms of this, the idea of when you get your wheels aligned, if you're driving a vehicle or whatever, if they're not aligned, there's friction, right? Like you may not notice it right away, but the longer you wait to get those tires aligned, you will see some. I mean, there is more friction, and you might notice it, and so on and so forth. So I think, and again, back to kind of when you're working with people in an office environment, that alignment value is just as important in an external way, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it again, alignment can, I mean, we can be, I mean, what's funny is we're talking about words, but words have lots of different meanings for different
Yeah.
people too. So, alignment for me is like, hey, we're all on the same page. We're all headed in the same direction. We're all, et cetera. So, and that's tough too. It's like, you almost have to have content, the I was trying to say a word and I can't remember. Consistent check-ins. In fact,
Yeah.
there's a person, I mean, there's a specific person once a week. It's like, hey, we're going to do a check-in. And we do. Like, we'll go to the coffee shop that's attached to my work and I get free coffee there, which is another perk. And we'll sit and we'll say, okay, check in. And we have a list and we go through it. And it's like, all right, I feel so much better now. So,
Well, and I think the other thing is with both with all these words actually I think today or a good chunk of them, taking a moment, taking a beat, taking a pause to figure that out is key because and it doesn't have to be very long. It just has to be enough to go, okay, are we lined up? Are we
yeah,
are what does this look like? And your choice for B is actually kind of
I know.
an idea of a pause, right? So go ahead.
Yeah. So I said this would come up and I didn't realize it was going to be right now. Break points. So planned pauses, like having, I mean, I guess that's the thing is part of adaptability is realizing you need these, even if it's, additional times, even if you haven't planned them, but I say plan them out. Um, I like to order my day and say, this is my list. And okay, after that's done, I know that's going to be a point where I'm going to need to have a break point. And what's great is the weather is cooperating now. So I can, step outside, walk around the entire building. That's a good 5 to 7 minute break. And I can grab a coffee, like I said, or whatever. Sometimes it's, hey, I've got to take this back to this other person on the other end of the building. That's a break. And I find that actually one of the other things I do is I try never to I never return to my desk the same way I left. So keep things all, I mean, at home it's like there's a tread path, it's always down the hall and back again. And that's a hobbit's tale. And then, but with this, it's like, break it up, change it up, do something different. And so just that extra spice of variety and intentional points of pausing just to catch your breath, just to clear your head, go have a chat, go have a not chat. If you were already in a chat, it's flipping all the switches, in other words.
Well, and breakpoints are kind of a version of my word for B, which is boundaries, right? The idea of boundaries, which I think came up last year as well. Let's be clear. I think this is one that we have had, or guardrails. There's a version of it, right? But the idea of
Yeah.
boundaries, you need to have those conditions in place to help you thrive. Like you need to be able to say, this is where this stuff happens, and this is where this stuff doesn't happen. And it's a nuance thing too, which not surprisingly, we might get to in a future, maybe part two. We'll get to that idea of nuance, but the idea of I need to have these things in place so that I can deliver my best work. And again, going back to the previous words that we've chosen, I think boundaries fits in really nicely and neatly there. And when you're working now with the team and it's a lot easier to set those boundaries when, again, you're sitting in your hybrid or remote space. But when you're in an office environment, that can be
Yeah, it can be tricky, but it's navigatable. All things are navigable. I don't know. That's not the right way to say it. But
well, it's about
anyway,
communication, right? Like as long as you're clear, and again,
yes,
be deciding how far and how many you can set, I think are really, really important as well. What do we
right.
have for? Well, I mean, see again, you talked about breakpoints, and I think this is the next word that you chose. I think is actually a version of that, or what it leads to, in a manner of speaking.
hmm Yeah, C for me was cadence. So it's being in that rhythm, that flow, kind of knowing. Um, I like to look at it as at some points your cadence. One of the other things that I've done um, over the course of this new position that I've been in and being in an office is I've also been going to the YMCA in the mornings and having a dedicated time of workout time and have lost a bunch of weight, feeling really great. That's part of my energy being up. I knew I needed to. Otherwise, if I was going to be around all these people, I just can't like sit all day. Um, but it's also knowing, in other words, cadence is almost like pacing. It's knowing, okay, I'm allowing a pace. This is my new pace for now, and knowing how long I can sustain that pace and then changing it and knowing when I'm downshifting. It's what gear are you in and how long are you going to stay there, essentially.
Well, and I think the other thing about cadence is that it can change. Like rhythm or pacing. Like I think most people think consistency with there, but cadence takes into account those like adaptability, the lulls, things that the
Seasonality.
break points. Yeah, the seasonality of it all, right? And in order to make proper choices around things like you just talked about, like when do I do these things and how do I make these happen? Where do these boundaries exist? You got to have clarity. You've got to have like, there's that quote by Thomas Merton, clarity affords focus. And again, it goes back to this idea of pausing. So when I chose clarity as my C word, it's the idea of, hey, I need to take a beat for a moment and get clear. I've written about the idea of a clarity day before. I think that you don't need to take them every week. You don't need to take them every, month, but seasonally it can make sense. And you can find these waypoints just to kind of reduce the ripples around you to get that placid kind of surface where you can really see what's going on. And then that way you can make informed choices, which will allow you to quote, get aligned, uh, inform what cadence you should be following, where breakpoints need to exist, all of that stuff. So, I mean, clarity is where a lot of this stuff begins, because if you have clarity, then you can really make sure that your intentions and attention, and ultimately your time and effort and energy, all of that stuff is working together and with you rather than against you. Um, and how do you? I talked about clarity day, like building a day. When do you do that? How do you make that happen? Well, your D word, I think, is kind of an interesting way to look at it as well.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't think it was this past summer. I think it was the previous summer. I have a friend who's a longtime friend, college friend, works at the university here in town, and I sat and did a 2-part episode with him all about designing, essentially those clarity days into your life. So there's an annual retreat. There's his different options where, let's see, it was like there's a weekly. There's a there's a daily, there's a weekly, there's a monthly, there's a quarterly, and there's an annual. And how he basically approaches incorporating doing all of those in his schedule. And I actually recently went back because I wanted to incorporate those a little bit more intentionally in my schedule, and listened in on that. And it's a fascinating conversation. He's hugely intelligent when it comes to this, and so I really enjoyed doing that. It's my friend John Drury, and yeah, and he has a now, him being a college professor, he has a schedule that allows for additional breaks, and summer and semester breaks and all those different kinds of things a little bit more than maybe us 9 to 5ers, so to speak. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. And so anyway, but designing, yeah, I really think just having that, it's the macro level, but as much as you want to zoom in.
Well, and what I love about that is another word that people often throw in there, and it's not my word of choice, but default. Like people will go, well, this is how things are by default. Thing is, I think a lot of people will confuse default with this is just the way it is, as opposed to design, which is like, how do I make it? Right? Like, how do I make this work? Right. And that takes being deliberate, and it takes deliberation, which is my choice of word. The idea of considering, of contemplating only to a point, right? Because deliberate, and I've used this in the Ready Retreat side of my community, the idea of being deliberate and deliberating, because it's the same word pronounced differently, meaning two completely different things, like we talked about alignment, right? So being deliberate is like, okay, this is purposeful. I'm going to do this. Whereas deliberating is like, I need to think about this, but in a very intentional way. And I think, when we think about terms like planning or consideration or contemplation, if we maybe flip that word and the word, that I've chosen and say, hey, if I use deliberation instead, because this is why we do these episodes, words matter. It has that double meaning of not only am I thinking about this, but I'm being very intentional about it. So it's not just this ruminating. It's more about, okay, this is going from thinking to action. And I think that that's something worth considering.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. E.
Let's yeah. So again, you can't really do what your word is without doing some kind of deliberation and deliberating. And being deliberate allows you to kind of figure out what to do with this E word. This E actually this is the first time I think we've got a compound word
Yeah,
here,
but
but it
I
still
you know
fits
what?
in.
I'm going to go ahead and say I've got it. It's written down as expectation setting. I don't think we need a setting per
It's just
se.
no, it's
Expectation
just
or expectations is good enough here. So this is one of those things where it's like, there's internal expectations. What do I expect of myself? What do others expect of me? Man, therapy right there. Like, how many? What are other people's expectations of myself, and am I living up to them? And is it even aligning? Going back to a different word, uh, does it align with? Does my expectation of what they expect of me align with their actual expectation? And if there's a chasm between the two, again, we could deliberate. Let's just keep using all the words.
well,
So often, what
but
I've found
yeah.
is when it comes to expectations, is to go to another word, just like the clarifying moments or the clarifying of it all is what it comes down to, and aligning it. Like, if you're not doing that, then you're walking on eggshells, or you're walking a path without somebody, or you're unable to be intentional because you're being reactive. So,
Well,
yeah.
and I think this is one of the first words where you can clearly say that, yeah, you can't manage time. Yeah, but you could manage expectations. Conrad Thompson, I mean, I listen to wrestling podcasts still. I haven't listened for one in a while, but Conrad Thompson, who hosts a lot of wrestling shows, is like, hey, the key to life is managing expectations. He doesn't say managing time. He doesn't say managing attention, energy, any of those things that some we can and some we can't. But if you can manage expectations, that is a big thing. And actually, let's add Tim's comment here from the live stream. I have a mantra of trying to ensure that things are always being done deliberately. So he's going back, circling back to the D word rather than accidentally. You can do the right best thing accidentally, but it's better to do it deliberately. And again, it does tie in nicely to the idea of managing expectations because this is a version of that, right? For yourself as opposed to maybe for others, because you can't you have to manage expectations for yourself.
Yeah, and or those that you have of others, my expectations on others, having realistic expectations and in fact even having realistic expectations of yourself, knowing how much you can handle without, piling on, saying yes to everything, burning out. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that leads into my word with is equanimity, right? The idea of steadiness and motion, of having that quote harmony balance without overwhelming yourself in the process. And I think it goes beyond just this idea of being calm for calm's sakes or kind of cultivating like emotional balance, like emotion, reason, logic, trying to figure out what that is. It's really about sustainable focus, right? And I think with equanimity, what you can do is you can get closer to that uh, evening out of quantity of work that you're checking off and producing versus the quality of work. So when I think about it that way, it's not just about balance and emotional states. It's more about, okay, I'm checking off these boxes, but what about the quality of the output? Or do these boxes really matter as much as, say, some of the ones I'm not checking off? So I think equanimity plays a role in that as well.
Yeah, it definitely does. And having that man, it's like it's one of those things where it's like equal
Mhm.
which makes me think of balance. And it's like, yeah, there's the whole remember we used to hear about work-life balance all the time. That was one of the biggest fallacies I think that I've ever encountered.
I think people have
I
finally
think there's
decided to drop off the work
yeah,
life stuff and just say balance. I think it's
yeah, it's just balance. It's just life. It's just balance of your life. And again, there is no such thing because balance means you're swaying back and forth, and that's okay.
right. Well, I think the
Acknowledge
other
it.
thing yeah, well, I think the other thing is that it's understood, excuse me, that um balance isn't 50-50, right? Like in that instance,
Right.
right? Right?
Exactly.
And I mean, it's if you've ever watched a TikTok video where people are trying to like slide something in right in between, they're like 93% and not 100%. Like, so that is a form of balance because 7% is not this way. Like, so it's we're not talking about like 50-50. And I think with as opposed to being equality versus equanimity, I think that adds that again, the word nuance to it, where it's like you can't it's the difference between trying to do things, exactly equal to the microsecond, to the micro time increment versus the week, where it's like, okay, when you're going with a wider swath of time, I think equanimity has a greater chance to take hold as opposed to the day to day. And Tim's bringing this up, this idea of, and I do like this idea here. I'll put it in is this idea of, dynamic balance. I think that is a good way to kind of look at it. And I think the other thing is as we kind of go through all of this, one of the ways that you can get things like clarity, expectations, equanimity, all of this stuff is through the word that you've got for the letter F.
Yeah, and actually it continues the thought on this topic because my F word, whoops, is follow through. And to me, it kind of continues this thought of I forget who it was I was talking with. I think it might have been and I'm blanking on her name, but she's the founder of the Whole 30, and she was
Oh,
on earlier this year.
Yeah, Michelle. I can't remember her last name either.
Yeah. And I think it was also Laura Vanderkam. It was a combination of like a 1-2 punch of talking to the two of them, and it was essentially all about consistency. Like, well, you get to say what consistent is. You get to say, what the not breaking the chain is in this instance. So one of them or both of them gave this example of essentially follow through for them, doing what you say you're going to do. And what consistency is in that is they gave the example of having family dinner. Well, it wasn't going to ever work to be every single night that worked, but it was like, well, how many nights a week does it have to happen in order for you to consider it successful, for you to consider it consistent? And due to people's schedules being different and, somebody had to practice or somebody had to work or whatever, it turned out it was 3 or 4 nights. That's not 7, but it's consistent. If you call it consistent, it's following through if you say that's enough. So I loved that concept. And I thought, no, you know what? Letting go of the guilt of saying we have to do it all 7 nights, or
Yeah.
it's not realistic. So I grabbed onto that in my head and I've been with it ever since in terms of follow through. It's like, no, you know what? How much is consistent?
Yep.
You
Yeah,
name it.
and you get to decide on that. And I mean, the thing about what you were kind of pushing back against, this is finally the first word where people might go, "Oh, but this is a bad word." But it's not, because it's a signal. And my F word is friction.
Mm,
Friction is a signal. Friction is, you're going to face friction. You are going to face it, whether it's this idea of breaking the chain that you have in your head of like, oh, I've got to block it off every single day, or external bottleneck that you can't. And I can tell you right now, as I'm going through the publication process of my next book, friction isn't, I am my own source of friction in some respects, but also I have to keep in mind that I'm not the only, not everyone's stopping to work on my book. There are other books that they are working on and other elements. So I have to, give them enough time to do what they need to do. And that is a form of friction, right? So how do you deal with friction? What are these signals that you need to pay attention to? And again, it's easier to kind of notice friction points when you take a beat and you stop in that moment and go, okay, how do I deal with this friction? A good example is what we're doing right now. I have a clock. I'm looking at it. We definitely want to make sure we fit in. We're recording this live to do both our episodes back to back. I know that, we want to make sure that we get to the letter M before we're done here. I'm like, okay, well, we got to keep that pace, that cadence going. That is a form of friction. So you need to work with friction in some instances. You can't necessarily eliminate it, which I think is a fallacy, that another F word there, that people try to do. Oh, I've got to remove all friction. Like, no, 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 no. Friction is your friend because it's telling you something. It's not something that you need to kind of, avoid, because you're going to find it everywhere. Right.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it kind of ties into my G word, which is grounding. And um, for me, this has been an important word this year, but especially again, being back in an office, because it's one thing to have ADHD like I do and be on your own and, just you're the distraction, or your own brain is the distraction, or you allow the distractions, or you put up the boundaries to block out the distractions. But it's another when you have to contend with everybody else possibly being a distraction. And in fact, like I have somebody that's right next to me who also has ADHD. And he's like, all right, headphone time. And we both pick up our headphones and we put them on. And we have, both acknowledged that, like, we both, okay, cool, focus time. And it's not offensive to each other. Like, I'm not offended he said that. In fact, I'm like, oh, welcome into the ritual. Let's go. So, but it's about knowing your grounding practices. It's about knowing, oh, my attention is way off right now. I've got to rein it in, or I am overstimulated. I've got to get up and not take my phone with me, not take headphones, not anything, and just go. Even if it's just a bio break, or if it's me going outside, if it's me walking around the building, or if it's me literally walking around the exterior outside of the building while there's not snow and rain and things out. But it's about grounding. It's about it's about hitting reset. It's about um destabilizing, or pulling the wrench out of the system, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and what's interesting is that we're talking about all these words, again, they all are related. Which is why
Yeah.
productivity A to Z. Like, I mean, you're talking like grounding helps you manage expectations. It helps you get your cadence back. It's a breaking point of sorts, right? Like the grounding elements can be there. But my G word is kind of that human component of, and we talked about this earlier, the idea of I've got to get all this done today instead of spreading it out over the course of a period of time, about managing expectations properly. And my word, which I have a very strong affinity to because my daughter shares the name of this word, is grace. grace and productivity are related in that it's the humane aspect. It's the human and humane aspect of it, right? We need to give ourselves grace. And it's tricky because you can't, again, there is friction. You won't be able to do it all the time. But if you can find ways like grounding exercises, like using things like I'm going to, instead of working through my list by project or by due date, I'm going to look at my energy levels. That's giving yourself grace. Communicating, follow through, all of these things are elements of you saying, I'm going to take all of this mechanical aspect of, quote, getting things done and being productive and add my own human component to it. So that way, as I'm making my way through, I'm not just doing things in a mechanical way, I'm doing things in a meaningful way. And I think that this is something that gets lost, especially when you're working in a 9 to 5 corporate environment where grace may not necessarily be something that you see at that higher level. You need to bring that to it. And it again, it can be challenging to do that, but I think it's really important because at the end of the day, it's, as much as we're getting assistance from things like, AI and things of that nature, there are still humans behind it. And grace is one of those key elements. And somebody on LinkedIn, by the way, is bringing up your word. It's hard to realize. It's Ukar, and I don't want to mispronounce your name, but sometimes it's hard to realize that I need grounding, and that's an example of giving yourself grace too. So I mean, there's a nice dovetailing and kind of simpatical relationship between those two words,
Yeah.
which we've
Yeah. Having
seen.
that awareness.
Yeah, we've seen through all of them, and I'm going to pass it over to you now for the letter H. Although I could have used your H word to say that.
Sure, sure. We could handoff is my word. This one, man, so my role, I haven't said what it is, but I am officially in marketing, and I am a marketing coordinator. And so, which again, you were like, wait, it has nothing to do with productivity. No, but I practice it all the time. Um, what's funny is like, I am like a hub, like I am a human hub. I receive and let things pass through me, and I hand them off to the right person. I'm directing people. I'm delegating, I'm receiving, I am brainiac. I guess I'm absorbing, and and all those different things. It's coming and going through me, and I'm deciding and triaging and handing off tasks, using different tools, passing it off to different team members, or doing things myself when it's applicable. Um, Man, it feels like a traffic cop for all the things that are going on. Sometimes I'm the one spinning it up, sometimes and I'm delegating it, or sometimes it's me spinning it up and it's me doing it, or someone else decided, hey, this is an Erik thing, and then Erik does it. But it's interesting. So and the other thing, handoff, sometimes it's me handing it off to me further down the road. It's passing the baton to future Erik, as I always like to say when I close out the day. It's like, okay, what is, okay, these things that I didn't get done today, because obviously stuff comes up. Is it a tomorrow thing? Is it a next week thing? Oh, does it even matter? I've been very loose with that to-do list lately, and I kind of love it. So,
Well, what I love is that you kind of just talked about it, handing things off to the future you, which is in the horizon, which is my H word.
yep.
Finally, a GTD term that came back in the form of your horizons of focus. And what's interesting about horizon is it. Most people, when they think about horizon, I think this is, and I'm being very general here, but it's come up several times in conversations I've had in recent weeks, not just over the years. Is the horizon isn't just months down the road or years down the road, although it can be, right? Sometimes it's just, a week from now. Sometimes it's just, t- 2 weeks from now. Like, I think that when you're driving, right? I'll bring that up. You're looking down the road. You have to your vision, you have to be able to bring it close and push it out further. And that makes your driving experience so much better because you're seeing there's a car turning up ahead. I need to pay attention, or those lights are stopping, or what have you. You need to be able to do that. But when in classic GTD parlance, we used to say polishing the runaway, people weren't getting up to the 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 feet. So the horizon is vast and long. And, we live in a world which is very much live for today because tomorrow isn't guaranteed, and remember that you will die. And I get that. And those are things that we need to, you know, it's good to know that. But I think that if you keep that in mind too often, you forget that you can push things down the horizon, however far that looks for you. And I think that that's an area that I think a lot of us don't, a lot of people, out myself included, they 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 need to pay attention to the horizon because it gives them that perspective, which is another word that may come up. That is really, really important when you're trying to be productive.
My I word is iteration. And one of the things that I'm often saying these days, I've said it so many times, I'm hoping people don't get sick of me, but it's like we're playing a game of inches and sometimes feet is what I keep saying. And it's like we gain a little bit of ground. Sometimes we make a leap. But ultimately it's about knowing, how much ground are we going to gain, this time versus next time. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to move the needle to 11. It just needs to move it a little bit more. We just need progress, not perfection, in other words.
Right.
Perfection may come, but only through many iterations and or tiny experiments, as Anne would say from her book.
And Laura would say, yeah,
and
we
Laura
both had
Constant.
her on, we've had her on both
Yeah.
of us had her on our shows respectively.
Yeah.
The other thing is that it also leads to perfecting, right? And that's what my word is integration, which is another kind of buzzwordy kind of thing. But I think and again, as a word nerd and a writer, I think that when I think about that word, it's not about like I need to integrate this in and I need to integrate this tool in my system. To me, it's more about how integral is this? Like the root of integration has, I think about words like integrity and integral and all of that. And so when we often hear it in a buzzwordy sense, like, oh, we're integrating this in or there's integration happening here, much like iteration, we hear that too, in various ways. I think that when it comes to integration, the pause that we can take is how integral is this to the work that I'm doing? And it, often integration can show up in forms of friction as well. Like, here, a great example really quickly is Evernote, right? I literally, as we're recording this, I did a live stream with Stacy Harmon, who's an Evernote certified expert, and Steve Dotto, our mutual friend, and I have chatted about Evernote and their recent pricing and limitation changes and stuff like that. Uh, the integration of Evernote into one system, how integral is it to the way is it so integral that you're willing to deal with those limits and modify or pay the extra money? That's what I'm talking about. Like not how do I integrate this, but how integral is this? I think that we need to go back to the root of that. I think we get more meat on the bone, for lack of better.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Let's see. Keep moving here. J. We are on J. Yes.
We are on J.
Just enough planning. So, okay, I can't, this is one of those ones where it's like, I'm trying to sneak in like three words.
You can justify it.
Oh, come on. That's not your J word, is it? No.
No, it's not. No, it's
in a way it is. In a way it is. But anyways.
I'm feeling this way. You're feeling this way right now, but you're feeling like I'm doing that thing to you right now. But go ahead.
Yes, you are doing. Yeah. Anyway, you'll get this in a second. So just enough planning. And again, I think this has to do with, I think this is a matter of perspective and also a matter of your J word, where it's knowing how much is enough. It goes back to the cadence thing. It goes back to the consistency and the follow through thing. It's about thinking enough, but not overthinking. It's about planning enough, but not over planning. It's about adaptability. Like I could throw out all the words. This is what happens when we get further into this process. We start throwing them all out because they're all connected. But again, just enough planning is, hey, look, sometimes you've got to get enough done right now, just enough. So it's essentially the it's the planning version of triage. So it's how much, it's what needs to happen right this second. Okay, how much needs to be planned enough for this to happen right this second? Great, cool, good, go.
I'm going to put this up on the screen. By the way, that was okay. I'm
What?
going to get to my J word
Oh,
in a
I get it.
second.
I get it. I get it. For a second,
Tim,
I was
look,
feeling really insert word here.
which is what the word that I'm going to share here in a minute can do to people, but I'm going to
Yes.
offer a variance to it. So Tim O'Hare put in the chat, which I love, is integrality a word or integralness? I would bet integralness probably is. It's probably just one that people don't use anymore, like productiveness being a word that preceded productivity. But I don't want you to feel judged here, Eric, and that my word is judgment. And it's interesting because choosing instead of words, we're really choosing phrases in some instances too, right? And so there is this idea of like, oh, we said words, like judgment isn't in the context of what I'm talking about, isn't about like pointing fingers or pushing people down. It's more about discernment, right? It's like making, again, you can't really judge something. And we often do. We jump into this judgment zone because it's where our brain naturally goes, right? Like our prefrontal cortex is, often overridden by our amygdala, which goes, "Oh, this is bad. You're making judgments on these things based on prior experience, based on historical data, based on even just primal instinct, as opposed to, you know, uh, does this really like? Hold on a second. Let's take a step back. Let's be smart about this. Let's be considerate. Let's be deliberate. Let's deliberate, like that sort of thing." And so I think that one some of the ways, again, it could be a point of friction. A good way, and we've seen people in LinkedIn saying the to-do list gives me anxiety. Well, is there a way for you to make it so it doesn't? Like, how do you maybe working by due dates is a bad idea. Maybe you use thematic like daily theming and theming elements or attention paths that kind of guide you. But
You're still
because
following a structure of some sort. You
right,
definitely need to be somewhere at a certain time. So you're
right.
you're calendaring in time and space.
Right. You're just judging it based on your current and again, the other thing is like any kind of judging that goes on. There's nuance, there's seasons. It's you're not going to come up with the same response, the same decision every single time. So judgment is one of those things where you may want to when you take a step back, you may want to reserve outright judgment so that you can discern and make sure that you're applying it correctly, which is what we've done with these words. I mean, in some instances, we've chosen words that are like phrases, and in others, maybe we're revisiting them. And I mean, your word, we did not, this is a new word, and it's actually when we were talking about like the idea of integration and integralness and coming up with word ideas, this one was an interesting one that you chose.
Yeah, this is a new one. So kinesis. 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 Use it in a sentence. Okay, I will. Um it's production, it's productive, it's being productive in movement, whether that's uh physical movement or cognitive. And those two things, by the way, I think are very much tied together. I think often it's why I feel like I've got to get up and move. In fact, I do some of my best thinking when I'm on the treadmill in the mornings. That's why I've found that like doing that and starting my day with that, um, even though that is not necessarily my what is it, chronotype to be up super early, but I'm on that treadmill before it's 6 a.m. Some people think I'm crazy. I am one of them, but I do it anyway. But it really does, like, the motion of my body and the motion of my mind first thing in the morning make what we say? It's not polishing
The runway.
the runway, but it at least, like, clears the runway for me to actually use it the rest of the day.
Right. So my word, Eric, do you remember when because we both are Mac guys and my early days were, writing Mac stuff. And there was this phrase called kernel panic. You have kernel
Yeah.
panic? Remember what happens when you have a kernel panic?
You get
This,
popcorn. No.
no, the machine just shuts down. It can't do anything.
Yes.
And so why is kernel my word? Well, kernel is kind of like the central idea, the central thing that you must protect. It's the thing that if you're working on a project, you've got an idea, you've got a concept or whatever, it's the core element that cannot be compromised, right? So to me, when you think of like, and a kernel can be, like you said, very small, right? But it is the central thing. There's going to be that first, for lack of a term, popcorn kernel that's going to pop. And it's the signal that everything else is going to pop afterwards, right? If you're ever popping popcorn on the stove, speaking of my friend Steve Dotto, he said, hey, you got to get one of these popcorn things you can do on the stove, which we absolutely love. You put in, what does it say to do? Put in a couple of kernels, put in one kernel. And when it pops, add the rest. That's when you know you need, or that's when you know you need to start spinning. So the idea of the kernel here is it's like the central idea that's worth protecting. And you have to figure out again, what is it? You may be able to make that judgment call right out of the gate, but you'll need some clarity. You'll need that kind of stuff. You'll need to deliberate on it. But once you've got it, the rest kind of becomes clearer, for lack of a better term. So if you are working from, and so in the context of time crafting, the kernel would be your certainties. Hey, what does my schedule look like? Okay, I'm going to work backwards from that. That's the kernel. So when you think about it in those terms, it is really, it's for lack of, the essential, the important, the crucial, and then you work out from there.
The chat is all making me hungry about popcorn now by adding
Yeah,
butter
fair
and
point. Fair point.
anyways.
We don't have a lot of your word left before we wrap up this episode. We got 2 letters. So
Yeah.
what is your L word?
2. Let's go. So my L word is leeway. So this is something that it kind of fits in with some of the other things we were talking about with design, with cadence, with breakpoints. It's putting or keeping, I should say, maybe space in your schedule so that you're not overloading. You're not. And again, I mentioned my to-do list and I mentioned being more flexible with it. This is what I kind of mean by that is I'm not putting too many things or scheduling too many meetings because I know there's going to be a natural encroachment on my time and energy and space and everything else every day anyway from yes, Tim O'Hare says buffer. That's exactly it. Is I'm keeping that in my my daily schedule and even my weekly schedule for the sake of sanity.
And my word also involves space to a degree, and it's a bit of it's a word that has emerged more and more. I think Ann Lord talked about it. I know Chris Bailey's talked about it. Nick Milo, this idea of liminality or liminal thinking, liminal, like that the idea of the space between what was, or even what is and what's next. It's that like space there. So it's interesting. We have a group coaching cohort that's just wrapping up as we're recording this, and we'll do another one in the spring called Maximize Your Minutes. And one of the presenters talked about like the space in between, like needing transitions to move from one thing to the other, and understanding that these rituals, not routines, because rituals for them is a more meaningful term, and it's more meaningful than say mechanical, like a routine. But liminality is like for lack of a term, it's this threshold where where transitions happen. So in this instance, they're being more deliberate about it, more intentional. But often liminality is quietly happening, but it's still powerful, right? Like time theming is an example of that, especially once you've got it happening consistently. Okay, like it just naturally happens, and you may already be doing that without. That's why a lot of people will say to me like, oh, I'm already doing horizontal theming or already theming my days. Yeah, because it's a natural thing that we do. So the kind of the spaces between like tasks, seasons, episodes, because we're getting close to wrapping this one up, that's where there's ground, and it's really fertile ground for things like clarity, creativity, recalibrating, grounding, like you talked about,
Mhm.
right? So
Yes.
it's a term that I think you're going to see more and more of as the thinking element of productiveness and being productive kind of still continues to take hold, especially with so much vying for our attention. You may hear this word, you may have already seen this word pop up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, my M word, as I wrap up this episode, is mapping. And again, I refer to my role in my day job. I'm a marketing coordinator, and so, and by the way, I did do the etymology of the word coordinator, and it has to do with connecting and collecting different pieces of information, making different things happen with that. I almost said your word, sorry. And then, anyway, uh, but point is, it has to do with priorities and in mapping them and keeping an eye on them, keeping tabs on them, but not in a hawk-like way, but in a loose way. It's like, well, if I know what the priorities are and I know that we got this major project that comes in and It's got multiple components and many different individual tasks, and it's got to have multiple people involved on it. And yet I know there's also another big project. And it's like, well, wait, we've got 5 big projects right now. Well, which one's the priority? And it's about mapping those and kind of checking in with the people in authority as to, okay, well, if this happens or if this is the priority, then it means while that's being worked on, nothing else is getting worked on because we got to move that one forward quickly. So it's just about mapping. It's about, it's about, oh, what's the map game everybody plays? I don't play it. Risk. It is Risk. It's almost like it's almost like a game of Risk where it's like, okay, I'm looking at the whole board here and I'm making sure that, but again, I said I don't play it, but it's what it makes me think of. Monopoly, that's a better way. It's like, which properties do I really want?
But I think there's a strategy behind it. It also lends itself back to the B word of boundaries, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
all of our words have meaning that are tethered to one another in some way, shape, or form, which, by the way, my M word is meaning making. It's a nice compound word. And yes, it is one of those things where I think when you have this idea of meaning making, it is that layer, right? That kind of turns the things on your to-do list, and to make them go beyond that, to like purposefulness, right? Like there is a purpose to it. So which can drive prioritization. It can drive the mapping that you're talking about. It can drive all of those things that actually allow them to, it can drive equanimity, right? Like the idea of, hey, we're going to have this. It's this story that you either individually or as a team create about the work you're doing, the time that you're investing into it. And if you want to go more personal, your life. I mean, what's a popular book that everyone says people should read? Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, right? Like,
Yes.
and Nick Milo, a friend of who runs Linking Your Thinking stuff, he's talked about this idea of sense making, and sense and meaning do have this idea. Like, I think sense making is the integral step before you get into meaning making, because I think that there's a correlation there. But when you make meaning deliberately, again, back to deliberation, then being productive, it just stops. You're not performative about it, because performative productivity is a huge issue. I think it's a lot of reasons why people are being, get back in the office. We need to see you working. We need to see this happening. Like, we need to see this. And and then we get that performative doing productive instead of being productive. And then all of a sudden with meaning making, it gets more deeply personal. It is actually the idea of being productive. So we're done A to M, and
Yeah.
we kept a good cadence going. We kept our boundaries where we needed to. We picked things up as we needed to. And so we're going to come back with part 2, which you'll listen to on Beyond the To-Do List, which Erik will be hosting, of course, because it's his podcast. But before we wrap up, Erik, where can people keep up with what you've got going on? And all the stuff. I mean, things have changed in the last year, so let's hear where people can keep up with what you've got going on.
Best place is to head on over to beyondthetodolist.com. That's where the show is. That's where you can find me. That's where you can find my conversations. From there, you can see any kind of social links, I guess. Man, one of the things I love is that my job does not involve doing social media of any kind. I have backseated that so far in my life, and I feel the most healthy I ever have with it. And it's so limited right now. I don't even have any on my phone, and it feels amazing.
Well, you're going to share this episode. You'll do that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes, I will.
Thanks to everybody for being here.
That's different. That's different.
Yeah, fair. Hope you'll join us for part 2. Until then, we'll see you later.